You know something is wrong when an American Affidavit of Probable Cause. Part 11, Going Forward Continued. The words of and for continued. For the next few weeks, months, maybe up to a year, you will be struggling to overcome assumptions left over from years of indoctrination. America is still beautiful, but it's run down and weak as a result of corporate corruption and criminality on the part of the banks, the lawyers, and the Congress. You will keep being tempted to get involved in political parties and voting rituals that are meaningless wastes of time and money. You will keep turning toward Washington, D.C., hoping to hear better news, when you should be turning toward Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, where your actual capital is still located. You will catch yourself thinking that the Stars and Stripes is your flag, when in fact the civil flag with vertical stripes and blue stars on a white ground is yours. It's not the Coast Guard flag, as some have argued. The Coast Guard started out as a civil maritime force to prevent exactly the kind of inland piracy we have suffered. That's why the Coast Guard took the civil flag instead of the Stars and Stripes as the basis of its service flag. The rats will try to keep you from using your flag because it keeps them from usurping your jurisdiction. They will tell you that the civil flag is a patriot myth and that the land jurisdiction of the continental United States doesn't have its own flag with vertical stripes. They can argue with Nathaniel Hawthorne, who described the civil flag of the continental United States in a time before all this self-serving British bunco began. After you start flying the correct flag and retraining your entire thinking process and all the assumptions you've been fed about how the world is supposed to work, you need to reorganize your county on the land, beginning at the township level, and then the county, and then the state. You don't live in any county of or state of anything. You live in Jackson County, or Macon County, or Clark County. You live in Alaska State, or the Illinois State, or the Colorado State. Anytime you see the word of, it refers to an incorporated state of state, a franchise of some corporate entity, and that automatically means that it is functioning in the international jurisdiction of the sea, not on the land. You can't make a blueberry pie out of lemons, and you can't act in behalf of the people of the continental United States while occupying a private corporate office in a governmental services corporation franchise merely calling itself the state of something. Likewise, when you see the word for, you know that whatever entity or document is being presented, it is being presented in behalf of some other entity or entities. Even the Constitution for the United States of America is a document being presented literally for the states of America. That is, for those states signing it. It would not apply to any state that refused to sign it. When you see a name like the Superior Court for the State of Arkansas, you immediately know that 1, it is a corporation, and 2, it is acting in behalf of another corporation doing business as the State of Arkansas. How do you know this? The use of the word for and the capitalization of the title. Crimes against humanity. All the issues discussed in this affidavit are crimes against humanity by criminal corporate organizations. Everything from identity theft to securities fraud to bogus mortgages, foreclosures, and evictions. It is all crime against humanity. Ironically, this has been enforced and allowed by those most obligated to protect us, the Department of Defense. America has been run under the Lieber Code, Geneva Conventions, and Hague Conventions since the Civil War. DoD and its predecessors have had their paws on the helm of our ship of state throughout, and have failed their duty to us, our soldiers, and our veterans, too. The crime of the century. You might think that the vast white-collar crime perpetuated against the Americans, Brits, Canadians, Australians, and Europeans counts as the crime of the century. But fraud and coercion, extortion, and even imprisonment and murder of individuals pales when compared to the crimes perpetuated by recent presidents, most notably George W. Bush and potentially Barack Obama. Under Bush's auspices, we suffered an obvious false flag attack against the World Trade Center and the murder of thousands of innocent Americans and people from around the world who happened to be present on September 11, 2001. But that is still not the crime of the century. The crime of the century is a deliberate pollution of Iraq, Kuwait, Afghanistan, and large portions of North Africa with American nuclear waste. The perpetrators took what they called spent nuclear waste materials from storage in underground salt mines in the western United States and packed it into artillery shell casings, which they exploded all over the Middle East and North Africa. George W. Bush, Richard Cheney, and Harry Reid are fundamentally responsible for pollution that will maim and kill innocent people in these countries for the next 60,000 years. Unless we find means to neutralize and/or recapture this radioactive waste, 2,400 future generations of innocent human beings will suffer birth defects, organ failures, radiation sickness, and death because these monsters lacked both brains and hearts. Almost as an afterthought, at least 100,000 American soldiers and their families are suffering the same fate and being lied to by the Veterans Administration. They are told that their obvious symptoms, children born as cyclops with missing organs or without teeth, the loss of their own teeth and hair, bizarre cancers, loss of short-term memory, hormonal imbalances, weird blood coagulation diseases, skin rashes and lesions that won't go away, etc., 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 is in no way service-related. Sorry, we did the damage, but we won't admit it, and we won't pay for your medical care or that of your family members. Just like Agent Orange, just like mustard gas, just like the Spanish influenza, just like so many other outrages committed by our government and its allies against our sons and daughters who have been left adrift, maimed, miserable, and sick, after being lied to by these vermin and in good faith doing what they believed to be their duty in defense of their country. To add insult to injury, the perpetrators buy million-dollar life insurance policies on every American, Canadian, Aussie, German, Japanese, with our tax money, so that when we die, they profit. How much is a life worth? When will we stop destroying what we can never repair or rebuild? When will the government corporations responsible, including the United Nations, doing business as the IMF, doing business as the United States, and its buddies in the Federal Reserve doing business as the United States of America, Inc., be forced to try to compensate the people they have harmed, the soldiers they have betrayed, the widows and children left behind, the innocent civilians murdered and maimed? All these government corporations, with very few exceptions, have taken part in war-for-profit schemes, and they have all functioned as criminal syndicates. Almost all of them deserve immediate liquidation, and only those that confess and redeem themselves merit reconsideration. This is the crux of the matter presented to Pope Benedict XVI in 2009, and it remains the crux before Pope Francis today. The root of all evil. The reason we have war in our midst is that it is extremely profitable for some people and some governments. The only way to get rid of it is to make it unprofitable for them. As remedy for war and a means of ending motivation for war, we suggest that a mammoth tax be levied against any nation that provokes, promotes, supplies, or participates in war or armed conflict of any kind. It should be enforced by all the other nations of the world and made payable to the Victims' Restitution Fund that must be paid out directly to the other nations harmed and to the individual victims of any such conflict. Te Deum. The remedy is simple, straightforward, and could be implemented tomorrow by the United Nations Security Council, if the members of that body were not the perpetrators of these wrongs. As the circumstance makes clear, the United Nations is part of the problem, not the solution. The United Nations is the same problem on a different scale. The solution must come from outside the box. It must arise from the thinking, living, breathing, willing people of the world, people who will change their way of thinking and their way of life and teach others to do the same. The last big lie. Representative government. Representative government isn't really possible. Nobody could ever represent you because you are far too unique and changeable. Your feelings, interests, and opinions change almost daily, and certainly via the passage of time your material interest shifts as well. Absent a continuous stream of communication detailing your exact needs and wishes, no deputy can honestly and reliably act as your agent in any state legislature, nor in Congress, nor in Parliament. At best, some of those elected make a good faith effort to represent the needs and best interests of the people who elected them. Most of those pretending to represent their states and their constituents couldn't give a fig about either one. As a result of being both materially impossible and unenforceable as a practical matter, representative government doesn't work, and it never has worked. It's another obvious fraud scheme devised as a means to give people the illusion of power, while in fact buying them off so that only a few individuals exercise any control, and they can then be bought off in turn. That is precisely what has happened throughout the history of representative government, and it is a large part of the problem we are facing today. Shining a searchlight on the cockroaches in Congress may serve the halcyon purpose of deterring them from doing evil, but very little can be invoked to encourage them to do good. Even among those who earnestly wish to do what is right, there are severe limitations in terms of ability, education, and intellect that moderate against the accomplishment of many obvious and supremely desirable goals. For example, Ron Paul has stood virtually alone in calling for an end to the whole Federal Reserve System, which should be as obvious as calling for the ouster of a fox from a henhouse. Notice that half the remaining members of Congress were in on the supply of readily available chicken thighs and breast meat, while the other half lacked the gumption, courage, and intelligence to stand with Dr. Paul. This is representative government in action. It doesn't work in reality because it is never possible to recruit people with the requisite mindset, purity, and dedication. Instead, any nexus of power relentlessly attracts idiots and psychopaths, bent on self-aggrandizement and petty self-interest. As it stands, the warmongers, the arms dealers, the professionals at the misnamed Department of Defense, and all the industrialists and subcontractors who supply support materials and technical expertise lobby the members of Congress relentlessly and spend the big bucks on campaign contributions to make sure that their representatives in Congress remain like fixed stars on Capitol Hill, while those who strive to represent all the little people back home are sent home with tin hats as souvenirs for their efforts. This, too, is representative government in action. It's not bad enough that these elected officials can't actually and reliably represent you. Huge organizations are buying them off to represent their interests instead, often in diametric opposition to what is good for anyone else on earth. On top of all this, less than 30% on average of the populace is involved in any aspect of defining or electing or directing the government at any level. How representative is a system in which 70% or more of the people are not even participating? So, not only is our system of government badly broken by fraud, deceit, and ignorance, any fix will be both temporary and inadequate to resolve the actual problem, which is representative government itself. Assuming that a lawful and functioning government of the people, by the people, and for the people can be reestablished, how do we address this fundamental flaw? We can outlaw lobbyists acting in behalf of organizations. We can set term limits. We can make war unprofitable. We can present ourselves as ourselves and weigh in as participants in our own government to a far greater extent. Beyond that, new technology makes it possible for us to make direct decisions impacting us and those we love. We could, for example, directly vote on whether or not to declare war, what percentage of the budget to spend on defense, and how much foreign aid to expend. We could hold a once-a-year national referendum setting the basic framework for government spending and imposing our priorities upon our servants, instead of letting them run rampant with our credit cards at the behest of lobbyists. By presenting ourselves, we can put an end to the farce and fraud of being represented, and stop being helplessly dependent upon others to be honest and conscientious about their duty to us. Going forward. To make an end is to make a beginning. The end is where we start from. Inspector Morse. We are at the end of a dark and desperate and dishonest time in America. What we make of it from here is ours to say. The Civil War, the First World War, the Second World War, and all the other wars for profit that have been heaped on our weary heads, and through our gullibility we visited upon other nations of the world at the behest of bankers, lawyers, and politicians. This must at last come to an end, not in another bloodbath here or elsewhere, but in an orderly, determined, and worldwide suppression of the criminals responsible. The evidence against the bankers and members of the bar associations is now completely overwhelming. They have no way to hide from their own criminality and no safe harbor left in the world. It is perhaps ironic and unavoidable that those we have entrusted with the job of dispensing justice have as a group become the worst criminals among us, and that those entrusted with global finance have, if possible, been more corrupt and inhumane than the members of the Bar Association. We should learn from this history, and as we go forward, provide ourselves with more effective mechanisms to dispense power and more efficient checks and balances. But for the immediate task at hand, the following steps are apparent. Number 1. Force members of Congress to either occupy the public offices they were in good faith elected to serve and accept their accountability as deputies serving as fiscal officers of the continental states, or otherwise admit their allegiance to foreign governments and corporate interests and release all pretension of claim, interest, or authority related to us in the land jurisdiction of the several states. Call for special elections to fill vacancies caused by lack of allegiance or membership in the bar associations. Number 2. Require the members of the actual Congress acting as deputies of the continental states, which are and have been at peace for 150 years, to formally declare peace throughout the American dominions. Number 3. Require the members of the properly seated United States of America in Congress assembled, acting as deputies of the continental states, to reinstate the Coast Guard as a completely civil maritime detachment under separate command, specifically charged with responsibility to prevent inland piracy and press ganging on our shores. To similarly reform the office of the Provost Marshal and to promulgate clear-cut rules and specific prohibitions against military operations within the states on the land, and the use of federal agency personnel stationed within these states. Number 4. Fully staff and reoccupy all public courts in the land jurisdiction at the county, state, and district levels, clearly marking and delineating the difference between private and federal United States courts versus public and continental United States courts, so that average people can readily and without confusion understand the nature and jurisdiction of the specific courts. If individuals wish to continue in their chosen profession as lawyers, they will have to decide whether to work for the public courts of the continental United States or the private courts of the federal United States, never the twain to meet. All Bar Association members must be retrained to thoroughly understand that neither they nor their courts have any jurisdiction whatsoever related to American state citizens, nor their private property assets, that their courts are not competent to function under Article 7, and that they may not hold any public office serving or relating to the continental United States while holding any title bestowed by a foreign government, including Esquire. Number 5. The general populace must be brought up to speed regarding the foreign nature and proper functioning of the federal United States, so as to expedite mutual respect and understanding of the respective roles and contractual responsibilities due to both the land and the sea jurisdictions. This includes making available reliable, simple, and complete educational courses in history, civics, and government as part of the public school curriculum. Number 6. All state legislators elected to fill offices in the federal state of franchises must, similar to members of Congress, choose whether they are acting in behalf of the federal United States or the continental United States, and either take their appropriate oath or depart from any pretension of public office related to the state on the land, for example, the California state. It may be appropriate for two state-level legislatures to convene, one acting as deputies of the land counties of the actual state, and another acting as a local franchise of the federal United States and its voting districts. But in no case should there be an obfuscation or confusion due to the use of similar names used to deceive people about the nature and jurisdiction of these two respective state legislatures, and so to use mischaracterization and semantic deceit as a means to defraud the living people of their property assets and their due. Number 7. The same kind of restructuring and separation must take place at the county level too, with all the same caveats in place and fully observed. It may be legitimate for the federal United States to have clearly defined outposts and service centers and administrative organizations operating within the continental United States, but it is not appropriate for federal franchises and agencies to use similar names that confuse the identity of such federal counties with actual land jurisdiction counties. Number 8. Commercial corporations must either be totally outlawed or strictly and efficiently policed to ensure compliance with their charters and lawful stated purposes. Commercial corporations have always been of dubious value as they exist to allow the investors, managers, and shareholders to avoid true accountability for their actions. These structures, it has been claimed, promote private investment in and capitalization of new technology and infrastructure. But it can also be claimed that such privileged organizations often make use of their relative immunity from prosecution to indulge in reckless, immoral, and even criminal behavior serving to suppress competition, cheat consumers, and poison the environment without bearing full liability for their actions. The system of private insurance, which predates the rise of modern corporate structures by hundreds of years, with sufficient protection for investors and shareholders to capitalize modern industry throughout the world without recourse to any corporate veil, and it continues to be employed by virtually all incorporated entities. So we are left with a deduction that a corporate charter is little more than a license to lie, cheat, steal, pollute, and commit other crimes and get away with it. This being the apparent reality and our current experience with governmental services corporations, providing substantial proof, we must ask ourselves what purpose, value, or benefit do commercial corporate structures offer society as a whole? Would we not all be better off to force commercial ventures to assume full commercial liability for their acts? Number 9. Escaping accountability for one's acts is a hallmark of criminal intent. And from our direct experience with modern commercial corporations, we have seen that intent realized. One possible answer would be to make corporations charter in local communities and be held directly accountable to the people of those communities. Another answer would be to limit the size of corporate entities so as to avoid monopoly-prone markets dominated by multinational conglomerates. Whatever we do and however we go forward, it is important for America and the rest of the world to face up to the problems that commercial corporations create for human societies and economies when they are not well regulated. Lyrics quoted from The Man in the Mirror by Michael Jackson. If you want to make the world a better place, take a look at yourself and then make that change. Final note. Please remember that 99% of the people involved in this kingdom of lies never knew what they were doing or why. Never knew that they were doing anything wrong. Inform them. Hold them accountable for what they do after this information is given to them, and do your best to forgive them, for they know not what they do. Purchase a hard copy of this book at Amazon.com or download a free PDF copy at states.americanstatenationals.org. Click on the red Education tab at the top right of the page. You will find it here.